Edmund Burke once said, "The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the upcoming release of the US intelligence report about the killing of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi and how this might impact the US-Saudi relations. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
David, there's a lot of questions being raised right now around the world about what this all means. What we see is that the Biden administration, unlike the Trump administration, is releasing information about the assassination of this journalist.
Well, that's correct, Ross. It's all started with the late phone call that President Biden just made yesterday to the Saudi king because usually it was a way of President Biden did not want to talk to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known also as MBS. And this for two reasons. One of them has to do with the ongoing war in Yemen, and second one has to do with the gruesome and barbaric killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who used to work for the Washington Post.
Well, what do you think Biden is signaling here?
Well, usually this is culturally speaking, it's a slap in the face in two ways. Basically, the president is not going to talk to a crown prince that doesn't hold the sway over the country, even though some say he does, but usually is a counterpart to counterpart. The counterpart to President Biden is King Salman. But the problem with that, King Salman is very, very old, and also he is sick. There are some reports that mention that he might be having some dementia, so there might be some challenges there. But usually a signal that there is a need for a recalibration of the US-Saudi relations.
You know, we're taking a look at the culture of Saudi Arabia, and we're saying, okay, this has some real significance culturally that the President of the United States has ignored him.
Well, yeah, that's usually a very strong signal that the President of the United States, there are traditions in the American presidency usually when a President of the United States holds office or is inaugurated, the first call goes to the closest allies, you know. In this case, President Biden decided to withhold the call, did not want to make the call right away, of course, because he doesn't want to talk to the Crown Prince, to MBS. And again, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. But also because there is an upcoming report that the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, it's going to lift the classification on a report about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, which implicate the orders of the Crown Prince himself. He's the one who ordered the gruesome killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Because you're a domain specialist in this area, would you give us a current review of where U.S.-Saudi that relationship is between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia?
Well, I did write a book about this topic specifically, and in it I wrote one chapter about the U.S.-Saudi relations. Well, just without taking too much time on this and just to give our viewers an idea, the relationship goes back to 1932, when Saudi Arabia was established as a sovereign state, if you will. And the United States got involved because of the oil. And this is what became the hallmark of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Oil for security. Because it is known in certain circles that Saudi Arabia is the personal gas station of the United States. So, and basically because will get oil from Saudi Arabia. We used to at the time very, very cheap at discounted price. In return, we are guaranteeing the security of the kingdom. So that's basically was the arrangements. Relations has developed over time, and of course, until 1973, when we had the oil embargo.
Oh, yes.
And at that time was under the former oil minister, Ahmed Zaki Yemeni, who just died about 3 days ago. And Ahmed Zaki Yemeni played a role into influencing that outcome. And since then, the relationship has changed to a degree, but was still the Saudis, because the purchase of weapons from the US, and of course from England and Germany and France, but mainly from the US, that relationship sustained itself. But of course, till 9/11, even with 9/11,
Oh, yes.
we all know the report that came from a congressional report over 9/11, indicating that the Saudis had indeed funded the terrorists and so forth. But even with that, it was swept under the rug. That gives you an idea how much influence Saudis have inside Congress.
Do you suspect that the Biden administration is attempting, with some kind of a consciousness or plan, to recalibrate the relationship with the regime in Saudi Arabia?
Well, they do, because that's what was President Biden has promised when he was running for office. That was his pledge that we're going to have to look into the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Mind you that Jamal was not only a columnist at the Washington Post, but also he was a U.S. resident. He wasn't a citizen yet, but he was a resident. He used to live in Virginia. And so the Biden administration wants to send a signal, because the previous administration under Trump kind of gave him
A free pass,
free
really.
pass, if you will. The Biden administration does not want to do that, because they do want to maintain the relationship with the Saudis, but they want to have some accountability. And you start to see some, because the call yesterday President Biden made it to King Salman. President Biden acknowledged Saudi steps in releasing, for example, opposition, including the female Lajan Lahdoud, I believe that's her name. She was released after being in prison for a few years, basically. So the Biden administration recognized those steps, but that wasn't enough. The Saudis have to do a lot. But the Saudis also are facing tremendous challenges internally due to the economic, but also to the behavior of the prince, who round up all the princes when he came over, when he took over, basically when his dad appointed him as crown prince, and hang them upside down, shaking them for money at the Ritz-Carlton, which wasn't a good move on his part, because now it's backfiring on him. And just for our viewers to know, there are about 15,000 Saudi princes. So about 2,000 to 3,000 of them are very powerful, with some of them with strong connections to Washington. So you can just see where this is going.
Where do you see the situation in Yemen playing into all of this?
Well, that was one of the things also that President Biden addressed with the Saudi king, is that they need to resolve this issue of Yemen, because that puts the U.S. in a bad spot. Well, remember, we did a show on this for the sale of weapons, and Biden indicated that he will not be selling weapons, well, offensive weapons that is, but there's still going to be some sale of some other type of weapons. Like we mentioned in our last show, Saudi is not going to differentiate between offensive and defensive. They're just going to use whatever. Yeah.
Right.
And the Yemen quagmire became like a nightmare. It's a humanitarian catastrophe that the Saudis found themselves in, and the U.S. was providing intelligence and all that. So the current administration wants, almost like, if we can use the term, wash its hand of this by telling the Saudis, you need to come to some sort of an agreement with the Houthis or whatever, figure out something and end this catastrophe altogether.
And as we said in that show, it looks like there's actually some action taking place in that regard.
They are moving forward. Yes, you still have some attacks by the Houthis at some point. Of course, we should mention that the Houthis are supported by Iran, and this is where Yemen becomes the proxy location. As we said in our last show, Yemen is the proxy between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because this has to do with the regional dominance
Right.
I disagree with what the prince has said that Iran wants to take over the Muslim world. That's nonsense because statistically it doesn't make sense. There are about 1.4 Muslims around the world. There are about 178 million Shiites, and the rest of them are Sunnis. So how do you expect 178 million Shiites to take over
1.4 billion.
Exactly.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
So it doesn't make any sense at all.
There are a number of people who are really business-wise interested in what's going on with Saudi Arabia. And I'd like to quote from a book that you wrote. From the Saudi perspective, falling oil prices, rising unemployment, and royal infighting over kinship succession suggest a disaster in the making. Saudi Arabia will be extremely challenged to meet the demands of its youth and simultaneously respond to the other geopolitical shifts in the vicinity. So we can pretty well expect that there's going to be some continuing turmoil in the region, especially in Saudi Arabia.
It will. As a matter of fact, with the MBS, the Prince Vision of 2030, which started on a shaky ground in the first place. And at that time, I remember back in 2018, I wrote an article warning investors that, that because the whole vision was not sound enough to consider investing in it. And interesting enough, a year and a half later, those who invested in 2018 lost their money. It's just because
I remember it very well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, too.
Exactly. And when the prince came over to the U.S., I remember some of my contacts informed me about why he was in the U.S. in the first place. It wasn't about visiting the White House at the time. It was about seeking $500 billion from investors here in the U.S. That's what prompted me to write the article warning investors, because the conditions are not ripe for that, because Saudi Arabia internally, with unemployment going up, with the gap between the poor and rich is widening, and also with the governance style of the prince that is like almost a dictatorship, that didn't settle well. And when you arrest other princes like the Prince Walid bin Talal, who is now number 2 owner of Fox News, you can just see where it's going. This is why President Biden prefers not to talk to the prince, but rather talk to the king himself. So it would be interesting to see how they move forward.
So here's I think the real question for people to pay attention to is Saudi Arabia and are these two in the United States, are these people allies?
Well, that's a tough question. Yes, they are allies on the paper, but at the same time, if you go back and look at 9/11, how can you expect an ally will do this? When you go back to 1973 in the oil embargo, how do you expect an ally to do this? The bottom line is it's a relationship of convenience. That's usually when I wrote the book and I delved deeper into researching that, to the point that the book had to be sort of cleared by the U.S. government. It's a convenience. It's a relationship of convenience. Saudis know they will not survive without the protection of the U.S. The U.S., on the other hand, at that time was depending too much on oil from Saudi Arabia. Now we can produce our own, but we still import some oil from the Saudis. Not as much, but we still.
So that they still are allies, but it's really a marriage of convenience.
Exactly, Russ. That's what it is. And I don't see any change to that anytime soon.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
As always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.